Picture this. It's late. You are sitting at your desk. Maybe you're prepping for some big meeting tomorrow or studying. Or honestly, maybe you're just endlessly scrolling YouTube while a lo-fi hip-hop stream plays in the background.
Right. Yeah, we've all been there.
Exactly. So the glowing screen is like the only light in the room. And then suddenly a track comes on that completely stops you in your tracks.
Oh, I know exactly what feeling you're talking about.
Right. It's got this infectious, shimmering groove, a killer bass line, and this vocal melody that feels incredibly nostalgic. But you don't understand a single word.
Because you're listening to a Japanese pop song from over 40 years ago.
Yes, and you just sit there thinking, like, how on earth does that happen?
It is a totally surreal experience, and it's happening to millions of people all over the world right now.
It's crazy.
It is. You're basically experiencing a digital phenomenon that is actively rewriting how we think about music and time and even human memory.
And that is exactly what we are diving into today. We've got this really fascinating 2025 column from Monumental Movement Records. It's titled City Pop Rediscovery: Why Overseas DJs and the YouTube Generation Got Hooked.
It's a great piece, really comprehensive.
Yeah, it really is. So our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how a hyper-localized genre of music literally engineered for the booming, neon-soaked streets of 1980s Japan was completely forgotten by its own culture.
Right, it's totally right.
Only to be, resurrected by modern internet algorithms and turned into this massive global phenomenon. We want to understand what this strange resurrection says about our own modern feelings of urban isolation.
The mechanics of how this music actually traveled are just incredible. I mean, it didn't rely on standard industry marketing or touring or radio play,
Nothing traditional at all.
Exactly. It traveled through blind code and, well, collective nostalgia.
I keep thinking about it less like a traditional cultural export and more like a dormant data packet.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, like imagine someone writes this incredibly specific, highly complex piece of code, right? They drop it onto a floppy disk in 1980 and just bury it.
And then we just forget about it.
Exactly. And 40 years later, modern internet users finally build an operating system, like an emotional operating system that can actually decode it. And the message inside was mysteriously perfectly tailored to the exact psychological state of the people who finally dug it up.
That's a really great way to frame it. Because to really understand why that psychological state is such a perfect match today, we have to look at the very specific, incredibly wealthy world that built the music in the first place.
We have to go back to Japan in the late 1970s and 1980s.
Right, because this wasn't, an underground indie scene scraping by in dive bars.
No, not at all.
This was the era of the Japanese economic miracle. Rapid growth.
Yeah.
Just unprecedented corporate wealth.
During this time, Japan was acquiring a staggering amount of capital, right? And with that came an entirely new urban lifestyle.
Yeah, suddenly there was a massive middle and upper middle class with disposable income. We are talking about the latest high-end home appliances, flashy imported cars, really expensive fashion.
And city pop was the soundtrack to all that?
Precisely.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a genre of music that happened to exist in the background. It was intentionally designed as the premium soundtrack to this new, affluent urban reality. It was like an auditory representation of the glowing metropolis itself.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because when I listen to city pop, I'm definitely hearing funk, I'm hearing American soul, I'm hearing a whole lot of disco and AOR.
So absolutely, the influences are very clear.
So I have to wonder, and I'm sure you listening might be wondering too, was the Japanese music industry just importing Western black music and disco trends and like putting Japanese lyrics over them?
It's a really common initial reaction, but diving into the source material reveals a much deeper synthesis. It was really a total redefinition of pop.
Wait, redefinition? How so?
Well, they were certainly taking that Western foundation, the infectious grooves, the tight rhythm sections of American funk and soul, but they were fusing it with uniquely Japanese melodies and a very specific poetic sensibility.
Okay.
Take AOR, for example, album-oriented rock. In the West, this meant slick, sophisticated, highly polished rock music designed for FM radio. Think Steely Dan.
Right, super clean production.
Exactly. Japanese producers took that obsession with sonic perfection and applied it to their own pop structures.
Oh.
The musicality was incredibly multi-layered. They relied heavily on advanced chord progressions, specifically major 7th and 9th chords.
Now, for those of us who aren't huge music theory nerds, what does a major 7th or a 9th chord actually do to the brain when you hear it?
That's a great question. Those chords inherently create a distinct kind of floating feeling. They're lush and open.
Floating, okay.
Yeah, unlike a standard major chord that sounds resolved and final, a major seventh doesn't resolve perfectly. It leaves you hanging just a little bit,
Oh, I see.
which creates this sense of endless continuity, like a late night out that you just don't want to end. And then the producers would deliberately insert subtly diminished chords.
What does a diminished chord do?
A diminished chord is highly dissonant. It introduces a quick hit of tension or sadness. So right in the middle of this upbeat, wealthy, floating disco track, you get this sudden, sharp pang of melancholy.
Wow.
Yeah, it was designed to sonically recreate the feeling of being surrounded by millions of people in a glowing city, but still feeling entirely alone.
That is, wow, it's the auditory equivalent of seeing a really bright, expensive neon sign reflected in a dark puddle.
That is exactly it. And the production value required to achieve that feeling was staggering. The recording technology in Japan at this time was arguably the highest standard in the world.
Like blank check studio budgets.
Basically, yeah. The engineers were using top-tier, wildly expensive analog equipment. They used massive reel-to-reel tape machines that gave the bass a warm, saturated punch. The column specifically highlights how producers aimed for both transparency and humidity.
Transparency and humidity. See, that sounds like a weather report, not audio engineering.
It really does, right?
Yeah.
But in audio terms, transparency comes from obsessive EQing equalization. Imagine a crowded room where everyone is shouting over each other.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
EQing is like carving out a highly specific, dedicated frequency space for every single instrument so nothing overlaps. The bass doesn't muddy the vocals. The snare drum snaps through the mix perfectly.
So it's super clear.
Exactly. That's the transparency. You can hear every single expensive element. The humidity, on the other hand, comes from very deliberate use of studio reverb and echo chambers. It adds a lush, lingering moisture to the sound.
Got it.
Tatsuro Yamashita's 1978 album, Spacey Tennis, is cited in the column as the ultimate monument to this era. It pushed the artistry of analog studio recording to its absolute limits.
But beyond the technical perfection, what the music really captured was a private landscape of the heart.
Yes, even amidst all this rapid urbanization and endless cash, city pop dealt with themes of nighttime drives, constant movement, and the isolation of the individual.
And right in the middle of this era, you get a piece of hardware that completely weaponizes that feeling of isolation. 1979. The invention of the Sony Walkman.
A total game changer.
Suddenly, for the very first time in human history, you could take a studio-quality listening experience with you into the chaotic streets.
It was a total revolution in how humans consume audio and interact with their environment.
I always think of the 1979 Walkman like the invention of the VR headset today.
Oh, that's an interesting comparison.
Yeah, because before the Walkman, you were just a person sitting on a crowded, noisy, uncomfortable train commuting to work. But you put those headphones on, you press play on a high-fidelity city pop cassette, and the outside world is instantly muted.
You're completely sealed off.
Exactly. You aren't just commuting anymore. You are the moody, introspective main character in your own private cinematic Tokyo. The music gave you a way to perform your own urban identity to yourself.
It allowed people to navigate the overwhelming nature of the booming metropolis while maintaining a curated, private emotional bubble. City pop was the ultimate high-budget soundtrack to an era of unbridled success.
But that private curated bubble was entirely dependent on limitless wealth. What happens to the soundtrack when all the money suddenly vanishes?
Well, the Japanese asset price bubble burst in 1990. And it wasn't just a minor economic dip.
Right.
It was a fundamental collapse that changed the core values of the culture practically overnight. The glowing, endless promise of the city completely vanished.
So the music goes down with the ship.
Essentially, yes. Because city pop was so deeply intertwined with that era of corporate excess and lavish spending, it was dragged down right alongside the economy.
The source notes it was abruptly labeled old-fashioned and frivolous. It sounds like the entire country woke up with a massive financial hangover and couldn't stand the sound of the party music from the night before.
That's a very accurate way to put it. The cultural mood shifted dramatically towards grittier, more individualistic self-expression to cope with the new reality.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, you see the rapid rise of J-pop, visual kei, and hip-hop. The polished, affluent, breezy sound of city pop was suddenly a painful reminder of a lost era.
It's like hiding a really flashy high school yearbook.
Yes!
You look back at the big hair and the ridiculously expensive clothes, and you feel this intense cultural embarrassment over your past excess. You just shove it in a drawer and try to forget it ever happened.
You don't want anyone to see it.
Right. But it didn't completely disappear, did it? It survived underground.
It did. It survived specifically in the club scene. DJs who were crate digging for rare grooves started finding these immaculate 1980s vinyl pressings in secondhand shops for pennies.
Wow, just sitting there in the bargain bins.
Exactly. People like DJ Murar, DJ Nori, and Jules Peterson, they didn't care about the cultural baggage or the embarrassment of the bubble era. They just heard the grooves.
They just heard good music.
They realized the actual bass lines, the drum breaks, and the production were world-class. So they started playing these records in clubs, which eventually led to some niche reissue mixes popping up around 2003.
Kept alive, but barely.
Right. It was strictly a niche interest for hardcore vinyl collectors and audiophiles.
But crate digging in a Tokyo basement is still physical, though. It's geographically limited.
Very true.
A few DJs playing vinyl doesn't explain how a teenager in Los Angeles or a college student in Paris ended up finding it decades later. The explosion didn't happen because of vinyl. It happened because of a cold, unfeeling machine.
The YouTube recommendation algorithm in the year 2017.
Here's where it gets really interesting. A single video gets uploaded. It's a track from 1981 by an artist named Maria Takuchi called Plastic Love.
The video itself is incredibly minimal.
Yeah, it's literally just the audio of the track paired with a single static image for the thumbnail, a vintage black and white photo of a pale woman's profile, looking slightly downward.
And that specific upload became the catalyst for a global movement. YouTube's recommendation algorithm is designed to maximize engagement through an auditory chain.
An auditory chain.
Right. It monitors watch time, skip rates, and massive webs of user overlap. If it notices that users who listen to Daft Punk or modern electronic music also happen to listen to this random 80s Japanese track all the way through without skipping, it starts testing that track on other similar users.
It starts connecting the dots.
Exactly. It began aggressively feeding Plastic Love to listeners overseas. The black and white thumbnail was visually intriguing, but the audio was undeniable. The video just exploded, racking up tens of millions of views.
The irony is just staggering to me. You have this highly calculated, incredibly expensive, human-driven studio masterpiece from the 1980s, layered with session musicians and analog tape.
And it was saved from total obscurity by thousands of lines of code.
Yes. An algorithm decided it was time for the world to hear this song again. But an algorithm can only put a song in front of you. It can't make you feel anything.
No, it can't.
Yet the comment section for this video transformed into an international nostalgia community. People were sharing stories of heartbreaks, studying at 3 a.m., and intense loneliness. How do millions of people feel deep, agonizing nostalgia for a time and place, 1980s Japan, that they never actually lived in?
What's fascinating here is that the algorithm inadvertently shared what the author calls the texture of memory. Think about the modern listener today.
Okay.
They are highly connected digitally, constantly online, but often physically isolated in their bedrooms or apartments. They live in urbanized digital environments that can feel incredibly lonely.
A totally different kind of isolation.
Exactly. So when they heard Plastic Love and the algorithm fed them more city pop tracks, that underlying melancholy we discussed, those unresolved major seventh chords, the sudden diminished chords, the lyrical themes of urban isolation, it resonated perfectly.
Wow.
The modern listener recognized their own digital loneliness inside the analog loneliness of 1980s Japan.
They didn't even need to speak Japanese because the emotional frequency was an exact one-to-one match.
It transcends language completely.
But once the algorithm served this music up, those listeners didn't just passively consume it like a museum exhibit. They actively downloaded it, tore it apart, and mutated it into entirely new internet subcultures.
Yeah, we see a massive transition from passive listening to active repurposing. DJs and internet producers all over the world, artists like Night Tempo, Young Bae, Macross 8299.
Huge names in that scene.
Right, they started taking these original city pop tracks and chopping them into pieces. They isolated the best bass lines, added heavy sidechain compression so modern kick drums would punch through the mix, sped up the tempo, and created a new genre called future funk.
And City Pop was structurally begging for this treatment. The source notes, the original tempos, were practically a gift to modern producers.
They really were. City pop naturally sits right around 110 to 115 beats per minute.
Which is perfect for what?
That tempo is structurally perfect for blending into modern house and dance floor tracks. It's a very comfortable driving groove. Because the original tracks had flawless, high-end studio separation, that transparency we talked about, producers could cleanly isolate a vocal or a guitar riff without muddying their own mixes.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, when you play Maria Takuchi or Toshiki Katamatsu under heavy bass at a modern club, it doesn't sound like a retro novelty. It hits like a contemporary dance anthem.
It feels like discovering an abandoned, perfectly preserved luxury skyscraper from the 80s, stripping it down to its steel bones and wiring it up to be a neon cyberpunk club.
That's a great visual.
But it wasn't just club DJs making people dance, right? You
Yeah.
also had internet native cultures warping the music for entirely different reasons.
Yeah, parallel to future funk, you had the explosion of vaporwave and lo-fi hip-hop. Vaporwave producers took these pristine Japanese samples and aggressively slowed the pitch down till the vocals sounded woozy and distorted.
Really warping it.
Exactly. They added artificial vinyl crackle, tape hiss, and digital noise. They were intentionally fusing the bright optimism of the past with a sense of modern digital decay. DJ Night Tempo actually referred to this entire creative movement as the nostalgia of the future.
Wait, I have to push back on this a bit.
Sure.
If Tatsuro Yamashita spent months obsessing over the exact reverb on a snare drum to achieve perfect audio humidity, and now some teenager is intentionally adding fake tape hiss and crushing the audio file to use as background noise for a study stream, I mean, isn't that just vandalism? Aren't we completely destroying the original meaning and artistry of the music?
It is a profound deconstruction, no doubt about it. The original context of the Japanese bubble economy was completely dismantled.
Just totally gutted.
Yes. But by stripping away the specific historical and geographical context, the music was transformed into global emotional material. It ceased being a specific Japanese historical artifact and became a universal mood.
Global emotional material.
Yeah, the past was essentially hollowed out and repurposed to create an anonymous, comforting digital space for the future.
Okay, so the original context was gutted. Did this internet mutation actually leave a lasting mark on modern music, or was this whole thing just a passing YouTube meme?
Oh, it has massively influenced contemporary music. In Japan, a whole new generation of bands artists like Suchmos, Lucky Tapes, Vondi, and Nilberg are directly inheriting the DNA of city pop.
Bringing it full circle.
Exactly. They are consciously taking those 80s chord progressions and analog grooves and reconstructing them for the modern streaming era.
And the source points out that overseas indie bands like Khruangbin, Men I Trust, and Crumb are intentionally incorporating this Japanese aesthetic into their own hazy, bass-driven sounds.
It's everywhere. Spotify data shows how deeply this has saturated global listening habits. In 2022, playlists like Tokyo Night Drive saw massive global engagement.
Wow.
The listenership spiked dramatically, not just in the US, but in Brazil, Korea, and France. By 2025, major overseas music festivals are literally setting up dedicated city pop stages.
That is wild.
It has evolved completely from a local Japanese cultural moment into a post-global emotional sharing device.
So what does this all mean? A post-global emotional sharing device. I mean, thinking about it, the hyper-specific, neon-lit loneliness of a Japanese salaryman commuting through Tokyo in 1985 is functionally identical to the digital loneliness of a Gen Z kid scrolling their phone in a bedroom in Brazil today.
Yes, exactly.
They are feeling the exact same isolation. It's almost as if the original city pop producers, sitting in those million-dollar analog studios, were inadvertently writing a prophecy for our current era.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this phenomenon heavily parallels other digital trends we see right now. Look at the rise of AI-generated videos, the persistent push for virtual reality spaces, or even just the aesthetic of retro video games.
Right, it's all connected.
All of these movements, just like the city pop revival, represent a modern societal urge to use fragments of the past to dream of a lost future. It's a collective yearning for a bright, optimistic future that was promised by technology in the 80s, but never quite arrived for the modern generation.
A nostalgia for a future that never happened. Man, we have covered an unbelievable journey today. We started in the high-end, meticulously engineered analog studios of Tokyo during one of the greatest economic booms in history.
We really did.
We watched that culture get buried overnight by a devastating financial crash. And then we saw it dug up, decades later, by a YouTube algorithm analyzing watch time data, only to be sliced apart and transformed into a universal language of digital comfort.
It just proves that music is way more than just a mirror of its own time. When it's recorded well enough, it acts as an empathy machine capable of crossing decades, oceans, and language barriers to find the exact people who desperately need to hear it.
Well said. So the next time you find yourself working late and you put on a lo-fi playlist to study or just quiet your mind, take a second to listen to the bass line.
Absolutely.
Remember that you are actually listening to the repurposed ghosts of a 1980s economic miracle, a sound perfectly engineered by analog masters to soothe your modern, overworked mind. And that leaves us with one final, slightly haunting question to ponder long after we wrap up today.
What's that?
If the 1980s Japanese urban landscape became our generation's nostalgia for the future, what piece of overlooked hyperlocal music being made right now is going to be dug up by the algorithms of 2060 to soothe the loneliness of their hyper-digital world?